you see that red thing, get going.
Okay.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I hope you guys made it to the new room, and I apologize for technical difficulties. I take all responsibility myself. It was, I'm sure it's something I did. I apologize for also my cat just walking across. Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you who found us here again. This is the second in the webinar series called For the People, and it is focusing on the positive things the federal government can do. The topic for today is infrastructure, which is in the news a lot lately. Today's talk is titled From Henry Clay to Joe Biden, the Evolution of Infrastructure in the United States. Towards the end of this event, we will post a link to a survey. This will mark your attendance at this event for anyone who is here for extra credit, and it will give us some general feedback about the webinar series. I'd also like to make you aware of another event that we are holding next week to celebrate Native American Heritage Month. It's on next Friday, the 12th, at noon to 1:30, and it features Tim Turner, Associate Director for Indigenous Education at Plymouth Patuxet Museums, and he will give a history of Wampanoag history and how it affects things today. We will post a link to that in your Q&A as well. Today's speaker is Dr. John Lundberg. For his bachelor's degree, Dr. John Lundberg is a proud graduate of the University of Texas at Austin. He has attended every Longhorn football game for the past, well, this entire century. For graduate school, he attended Texas Christian University, which has a slightly less impressive football team, and graduated from there in 2007 with his PhD in 19th century United States history. His dissertation was Granbury's Texas Brigade, which was published in book form by Louisiana State University Press in 2012. He is currently working on his next book, The Texas Lowcountry, Slavery and Freedom on the Gulf Coast, 1822 to 1895, for Texas A&M University Press. He teaches history on the South Campus of TCC. He's also currently the editor of East Texas Historical Journal. His accomplishments are much too long to list because we have to reserve some time for him to speak. So I proudly introduce to you Dr. John Lundberg.
Thank you, Professor Wisely. So today I am going to talk to you about the topic of infrastructure, and you may ask yourself, why is Dr. Lundberg in front of an image of the San Antonio Riverwalk? What does the San Antonio Riverwalk have to do with infrastructure? Well, we're going to explore that. I'm not going to show my face for the whole time, but maybe just for the beginning. Certainly there's no need for you to look at my face for an hour or so. When we talk about infrastructure in the United States, first of all, let's get a good definition of infrastructure. The definition of infrastructure, according to the dictionary, is the basic physical and organizational structures and facilities needed for the operation of a society or enterprise. And the examples that gives are buildings, roads, or power supplies. That is a narrow definition of infrastructure. I would argue that since the 1930s, at the very least, the U.S. has gone beyond that in terms of our emphasis on infrastructure, but we're going to talk about that. One of the things you have to understand is that from the very beginning, the federal government was in the business of encouraging American infrastructure, starting with Alexander Hamilton's plan to establish a national bank, which passed the Congress very narrowly in 1791. Hamilton's idea was to have a centralized monetary authority for the country that would help economic development in the country. As you may know, there was a great deal of controversy over the Bank of the United States. The Congress did not renew the first Bank of the United States in 1811. It was on a 20-year charter. And during the War of 1812, the United States found that economically, we very much needed a bank to finance not only the war, but also all of the development to the Southwest in what is now Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. You needed a central bank in order to loan money, primarily for enslavers who were opening up new cotton fields, and the enslaved who were producing this new cotton crop that helped launch the United States into becoming a world economic powerhouse. So enter Henry Clay. He's first elected to the Congress, takes office in 1811, and Clay is from Kentucky. Clay comes up with a system called the American system. And the American system is going to be tariffs in order to finance the building of roads and canals that are going to link the country. Now, first of all, a tariff, of course, is a tax on imports. And so the tariff is controversial because it's not going to fall evenly on the country. Those who import a great deal of goods are going to pay heavier tariffs than those who have, say, own the emerging textile mills in New England that are emerging at this time. But despite the controversy in 1816, the Congress does pass the first protective tariff. And it was called a protective tariff because it's meant to protect domestic manufacturing. And in 1816, the Congress also charters a second Bank of the United States. And under Clay's American system, the first professional roads are built in the United States, like the National Road, the Cumberland Road. You have the completion of the Erie Canal, which is constructed by the state of New York. But what you have to understand is it is direct government intervention in the economy, in particular coordinated intervention on behalf of the federal government that is helping to create all of these things. So the Clay's American system helps to expand the U.S. economy. And because the United States is a large country, geographically speaking, infrastructure in the United States, and this applies to Clay's American system as well, is usually been focused on transportation and communication. And those are the two main themes that I want to talk about, is transportation and communication in terms of infrastructure. So, well, of course, economic development as well, in correlation with those. So the bank, the canals, the roads, they would all fit within transportation, communication, and economic development. The second Bank of the United States was famously killed by President Andrew Jackson in 1836. And between 1836 and the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the United States famously had no centralized monetary authority. And because of that, infrastructure in the United States, infrastructure was not as robust. There were not as many federal programs undertaken. You also have to take into account the American Civil War during that time period. But keep in mind that the next big push in terms of infrastructure in the United States was the building of railroads, really starting in the 1820s, but ramping up in the 1840s and 50s. There were quite a few railroads that were constructed before the American Civil War. As you probably know, railroads greatly helped the United States win the American Civil War. So that was an important accomplishment of those railroads. During the American Civil War, the Congress chartered the first Transcontinental Railroad. Beginning in 1863, you had the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad that began building toward each other. The Union Pacific west from Omaha, Nebraska, the Central Pacific east from Sacramento, California. They, of course, met in May of 1869, connecting the two halves of the country. So once again, federal government investing in infrastructure helped to link the country in terms of railroads. But the lack of a centralized monetary authority really set infrastructure construction back in many ways in the period after the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Railroads were the first corporations in the history of the United States to begin offering stock, selling stock in their companies to investors. And so as a result, you had a lot of railroads that were constructed during the time period after the American Civil War. Railroad mileage ultimately would peak in 1916. But a lot of these railroads were underfinanced. They were poorly managed. You had bad stock that was being traded. And ultimately, it was the collapse of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad in 1893 that set off the dominoes that caused the Panic of 1893. And the Panic of 1893 turned into the worst economic depression that the United States has ever experienced. And we always think of the Great Depression. The difference with the depressions of 1893 is that it lasted until the end of the decade, but it did not last as long as the Great Depression did, because the Great Depression lasted for a full 10 years. But in terms of businesses lost, in terms of jobs lost, that depression really had a profound impact on the history of the country. And a lot of that was a haphazard approach to financing by the federal government. You had debates over whether or not we should adopt greenbacks, that is paper money, or gold or silver. And because of this haphazard approach, the lack of centralized monetary authority, the lack of coordination between the federal and state governments, you had this collapse that led to this massive depression. After the country recovered from the depression of the 1890s, the next big push in infrastructure came during the Progressive era, when President Woodrow Wilson and Senator Carter Glass, later Senator, but Carter Glass, his Secretary of the Treasury, helped to create the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System, of course, had some of the same characteristics as the Bank of the United States, but not all. And the Federal Reserve has provided a steady hand in terms of federal monetary authority and federal monetary policy ever since 1913. So again, it took a centralized approach, a coherent approach by the federal government, and in order to create this infrastructure. The next big push in infrastructure in the history of the U.S. came during the New Deal. Obviously, the Great Depression began with the stock market crash in 1929, and people are out of work. They need jobs. And so President Franklin Roosevelt is elected in 1932, and in 1933 begins proposing a series of programs that are going to remake the country. And in many ways, the infrastructure of the New Deal still guides our everyday lives, even in the 21st century, some 90 years after these programs were enacted. The New Deal programs constructed highways, buildings, bridges, really modernized the country, helped create dams that for the purposes of hydroelectricity, like the Boulder, later renamed the Hoover Dam, which was actually started under President Herbert Hoover, and the San Antonio Riverwalk. And in many ways, my world was created by the New Deal. One of the New Deal programs, what part of the New Deal was to help those who were unemployed find work. And a great many of those federal grants went to the states. The states began creating unemployment agencies. In Texas, it was called the Texas Employment Commission, which was founded in 1935. And it was while working for the Texas Employment Commission that my parents met and married in Austin. The park that I grew up going swimming in was built by the New Deal. The state parks that I grew up going camping in were built by the New Deal. The Central Tower and Library of the University of Texas at Austin, where I went to college, was built by the New Deal. There were so many structures built by the New Deal across the country. The New Deal encouraged the building of rural electrical cooperatives, and I grew up. My parents' house was powered by the power from the Pedernales Electric Cooperative, which was a New Deal program. The San Antonio Riverwalk was built with New Deal money, and so you can see that behind me. Spent a great many enjoyable time, especially growing up on the San Antonio Riverwalk. So the New Deal money paved the roads in rural Louisiana for the first time. There were so many things that were created by the New Deal. And also importantly, the New Deal began to expand the definition of infrastructure. It was more than just buildings and airports and roads. They also began investing in what we might call human infrastructure through programs like the WPA, where you had the artists program and the writers program, the WPA play program to put on plays for children. You had so many projects that were financed to keep artists and authors and others with skills like that employed during the Great Depression, that I think that the New Deal marks a real emergence, as I said, of what we might call human infrastructure. Moving on from the New Deal, some New Deal programs were continued, some were discontinued. But really the next big push for infrastructure comes as a result of the pressures of the Cold War. In 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower signs into law the Interstate Highway Act, and under that act, our interstate highways are constructed. Once again, you see an emphasis on more traditional infrastructure with the Interstate Highways Act in terms of transportation. But the interstate highway system, although it was originally designed for national defense, has transformed the country. There is not a single major U.S. city that does not have an interstate highway through it. I myself live close to Interstate 35. But during the Cold War, you also have other emphases on infrastructure, such as, first of all, the military developed a lot of programs, including ARPANET, that was launched in 1966. That was the forerunner to the internet, the forerunner to the World Wide Web. And so you have government infrastructure that essentially helped to create the internet. I don't think there's any dispute that without the intervention of the federal government, we wouldn't have an internet. We wouldn't be having this discussion online right now. That we wouldn't have our interstate highways. And so throughout the Cold War, you also see development, you also see other infrastructure programs that are undertaken. under the Great Society programs under President Lyndon Johnson. You had the funding to construct community colleges across the country, like Tarrant County College District, which was founded in 1965. The first campus opened in 1967. And so you're building buildings as a part of this Tarrant County College program, but you're also creating human infrastructure by making education easily available. And again, this is all through the intervention of the federal government. You have federal intervention in human infrastructure in terms of Pell Grants, in terms of Medicare and Medicaid. These are all the Social Security program. These are all examples of infrastructure, but of soft infrastructure, human infrastructure, if you will. The problem, of course, today is that not since the 1950s and 60s have we had robust investment by the federal government in our infrastructure, physical or human. And as a result, a great deal of it is crumbling. Our highways are often in bad shape. Our bridges are in bad shape because many of them were only built to last 50 or 60 years, and we're already at that fail-safe point. Some of the infrastructure from the New Deal has never been updated, and it's been almost a century since those programs. And so what we need today is a coordinated federal investment in infrastructure, and not just physical infrastructure, but human infrastructure too. We need to increase Pell Grants. We need free community college, taxpayer-supported community college free of tuition. We need repairs to our roads and our bridges. 25 years ago, the state of Texas had roads and bridges that were the envy of the country. Not so much today. And the reason is that the state of Texas has not invested in repairing our roads in the last 30 years. So what you have is you have local counties, cities, and local governments who try to invest in infrastructure, but nothing coordinated, nothing from the state level, and certainly very little from the federal level. What repairs we do have to our roads and bridges actually does mostly come from the federal level, but it's not nearly enough. And so we have to make hard decisions about what we're going to invest in as a country. There's a great deal of talk about the national debt, and all of that is relevant. But at the same time, if we do not increase our expenditures in terms of infrastructure, we will cease to be a leading nation in the world. Once again, we will not have innovations like we've had in the past with the internet, with our, the incredible communication and transportation systems we have in this country. They're just not going to be widely available. They'll be available to the wealthy, but not to your average American. And that is going to set us back as a country. And so I'd encourage us to think about infrastructure in a couple of different ways. But that is a brief history, a brief introduction to the history of infrastructure in the United States. And I'm curious to know what questions y'all might have about that or thoughts. And so I guess here, Professor Wisely will open it up to questions.
I don't know that they can hear me. I think you're still live, and I'm not sure where Dr. Northrup is, but we will open it for questions.
Yeah, let's open it up for questions. If you have questions, drop them in the chat.
Yeah. In the meantime, I have a question. You might have to repeat this.
Sure.
You talked about human infrastructure a little bit and how important that is. Has that always been the case, or when has human infrastructure become such an important I guess you don't have to, I'm live now, I see. When has human infrastructure become such an important part of infrastructure? Because I think it's only been recently that we've started to hear about that. Is this a new development, or has this always been the case and we just haven't called it that?
Well, I would argue that really since the New Deal, we've had robust federal investment in human infrastructure. So the New Deal is really when that starts in the 1930s. And so you see the Social Security program, you see the WPA programs to invest in the arts and in music and things like that. And so I think that's the beginning of investing in human infrastructure. And then it went even further during the Great Society. We have the establishment of community colleges, when we have the establishment of Medicare and Medicaid. And so we haven't always called it human infrastructure, but essentially that's what it's been since the New Deal. So the last, 90 years.
Okay. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. What, just as a historian and someone who has thought a great deal about this, what do you see as like the top one or two most important infrastructure investments that we've made in the United States history?
I'd say the Interstate Highway Program is certainly one of them. But in terms of hard infrastructure, I'd say the Interstate Highway Program, the building programs of the New Deal, taken as a whole. In terms of soft infrastructure, I mean, you'd have to look at Medicare, Medicaid. Community colleges have been just tremendously important to the development of our communities. And so, yeah, I would say, Interstate Highway Program, community colleges. And there's nothing on the screen.
Okay, all right. If I'm on the screen, can you hear both of us? Or yeah, there you go. Okay, we'll put you on. All right. Can you hear both of us when I'm not sure.
Oh, she says yes. Okay.
Okay. All right. So a question has come in that says, how can young adults invest in infrastructure?
Oh gosh. How can young adults invest in infrastructure? That's a good question, because I mean, I would say probably the most important thing is to develop your education, to get an education, because that's how you're ultimately going to be able to contribute the most to the workforce, and then, to society as a whole. I think that education is key.
Again, put your questions in the Q&A if you have them. We'll be happy to. And then another question has come in that says, is that a good investment? And I'm assuming they mean about education. Is that what you're asking? And if so, you're asking a really biased audience here, as we're all in this room professors of a community college. So of course we're going to say absolutely it's a good investment. And even taking away that it is our jobs, I think that probably we would all agree that, wouldn't we, Dr. Lundberg?
Yeah, I understand though where the student is coming from. It can be an expensive investment, but what I would say is this: it's not necessarily about the diploma, but it's about the the critical thinking skills that you develop. It's about the skills that you develop in the education. So critical thinking skills are the cornerstone of any sort of cultivated mind. And the ability to write, the ability to express yourself coherently. Those things are all going to benefit you in every endeavor that you undertake for the rest of your life, and they will give you, if you're able to think critically and do that well, if you're able to write well, they will give you an advantage over others in the workforce.
Okay, clarification has come in. They didn't mean education. They meant the interstate. That's refreshing to know, because I hope that you guys all who are taking classes feel like it's worth your trouble and your money. So that's relief.
Yeah, I think the interstate highways are huge. As early as the 1890s, the populists called for public ownership of the railroads. And you could argue that interstates are kind of a fulfillment of that desire on the part of the populists. And the interstates are valuable because they streamline transportation, and because goods and services and people can travel so much easier from one side of the country to the other. It makes everything less expensive. It makes everything easier. And so, yeah, the interstates are a tremendous investment, I think. And, I think the next investment we need to start looking at, and they have this in parts of the country, but not in others, is more high-speed rail, more public transit. I know there's a lot of debate over that, but if we had adequate public transit systems, we wouldn't use the interstates as much. And it would cut down on pollution. It would cut down on traffic and all sorts of issues. And so the interstates are a good investment, but I think going forward, we also have to invest in rail, high-speed rail, or just more efficient systems of public transit.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Let's see. How do you think technology and like space research fits into our infrastructure, and do you feel like these are good investments or not?
So a lot of the technology we use today, from cell phones to microwaves to the internet, came out of as a byproduct of projects that NASA and other military and the military invested in. So you hire the smartest people in the world to sit around coming up with ideas, and as a byproduct, they come up with these ideas that end up transforming society. And so, yeah, I think it's hugely important. Like I said, we wouldn't have cell phones or the internet without the military and NASA, funding things like that.
Yeah, seems like a good use of money. We have a comment here: less toll roads, please. And the pedant in me says fewer toll roads. But sorry about that.
Toll roads are a direct failure to invest in infrastructure. So what we do then is we have to bring in foreign companies that will build the toll roads, and then they want their money back and they want to profit from them. And so if we want fewer toll roads, tell the state legislature to raise the gas tax. Tell the Congress to pass this hard infrastructure bill so that we have more money to build public highways. We've already been taxed for it. It's just a matter of using the money for that purpose and not for something else. You're right. Toll roads are a bane, and they're a direct result of a failure of our government to invest in infrastructure, and instead kicking that off to the private sector.
Good point. Yeah. And you know, it's as long as people are willing to pay for a lighter traffic and get on those toll roads, then they're gonna probably keep going. Another question came in from Anonymous. Can you explain why you chose the specific title for this presentation? Why you started with Henry Clay and came all the way through?
So, yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I would argue that Henry Clay is the architect of American infrastructure with his American system. Yes, you have the National Bank with Alexander Hamilton, but Henry Clay is really the one who proposes a comprehensive system of roads and canals coupled with the National Bank. And then all the way to Joe Biden, simply because Biden is currently the president who's attempting to put an infrastructure bill through. As a matter of fact, we may have a vote in the House of Representatives today on an infrastructure bill. One of the things that I applauded about the Trump administration is that President Trump did say he wanted to focus on infrastructure. The problem is that I never saw, and the Congress never saw, any sort of a coherent bill to accomplish that. And so I would have loved if the Trump administration had been able to pass hard infrastructure, but they never presented a coherent plan to get a bill pushed through Congress to do that. And so what I see with the Biden administration is at least an attempt to do that with an actual bill or series of bills. So I think that's why I ended with Biden.
Just another question while we're on the subject of Henry Clay. When Henry Clay proposed his American system, James Monroe wasn't too keen about the federal government being the one who is in charge of that kind of hard infrastructure. You may have already spoken of this, but when did that exactly change? When did the federal government really start getting in there?
I would say the attitudes by the president and the Congress, they sort of began to change. Well, they began to change under Teddy Roosevelt, but then they really began to change under Franklin Roosevelt, right, under FDR. And I mean, that's when the Congress and the federal government, because of the Great Depression, decided that they really needed to get directly involved. And that was one of the reasons that voters defeated Herbert Hoover for a second term in 1932, is because Hoover thought, like James Monroe, that it was not the role of the federal government, and that's not what voters wanted.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So was it kind of a states' rights versus too much power for the federal government thing, or what do you think the main argument was?
Yeah, I think the argument is that they just did not believe that the framers of the Constitution intended for the Congress or the president to have that sort of authority or power. And they may have been right. But again, societies evolve, and there's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits that sort of thing. And in fact, you have men like Alexander Hamilton who helped frame the Constitution that were in favor of a national bank. So it's partially a states' rights argument, but it's partially an argument about what the role of Washington, D.C. should be in the lives of everyday citizens.
Okay, another question's come in from Bradley Cheek. He asks, what do you think about the efficacy of the Workforce Investment and Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Acts in terms of economic development and alleviating unemployment as a barrier to education?
Okay, are those acts that are currently in front of the Congress, I assume?
I'm not sure. That is a good question.
I'd have to go back and refresh my memory on the exact details of those bills, but anything that we can do to help increase workforce training, anything that we can do to help is going to help with unemployment issues. As far as the efficacy of the bills, again, I'd have to refresh my memory as far as the exact details of what's in those bills.
All right. According to, Wikipedia,
Yeah.
the Workforce Investment Act of 1998 was then repealed and replaced by the 2014 Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It provides workforce investment activities through statewide and local workforce investment systems, increase the employment, retention, and earnings of participants, and increase occupational skill attainment by participants, and as a result, improve the quality of the workforce. I mean, that it sounds great. As far as how it is implemented, I'm assuming that's going to be a part of any concern that we have, right?
Yeah, I mean, how it's going to be implemented is going to be up to the state state government. It's going to be up to what is now the Texas Workforce Commission, what was the Texas Employment Commission, and so really the efficacy is really going to depend on where you live and how the states and local governments take that money and use it. Some may use it better than others, more efficiently than others.
True. And it's really hard to keep up with the names of all of these. So, if you want to ask a question about a specific piece of legislation, that especially ones that have happened in the last like 20 years, because is it 25 years that we're considering history, right? We have to marinate in it for that long?
Yeah, usually there's about a 20 to 25 year moving wall that, definitely. So the end of the Cold War really has just been history for about 5 years now.
Yeah. We're not even really technically 9/11 hasn't yet had enough time to marinate so that we can.
And we're still seeing the fallout from 9/11. Yeah. We're still the as Bob Dylan put it, the wheel is still in spin.
Yes, exactly. So you'll have to forgive us for not knowing these particular pieces of information. Let's see. Let me get that survey out to you. In the meantime, can you talk a little bit more about what you know that is in the current infrastructure bill? I know that's not history, as we just discussed, but it's something that maybe we can.
I think that universal pre-K is a tremendous idea. Would be a tremendous investment in the youngest Americans out there. I think that free community college certainly has its merits. I think that we're the only industrialized country in the world without mandatory paid leave, maternity and paternity leave. So I think that some of those programs would be excellent as well. The hard infrastructure, everyone agrees on the hard infrastructure. Republicans and Democrats have all said, yeah, hard infrastructure we need. I think a lot of the disagreements come in terms of the soft infrastructure, the human infrastructure, if you will. But I think that the question is not whether or not they're good programs and needed. The question is whether or not we can afford to pay for them, right? I think that's the issue that Congress is dealing with.
Yeah, and generally that's the issue with infrastructure. When the highway systems were built in the 1950s, in the interstate highways, was that a question that came up a lot then? How we're going to pay for it, or was it?
Well, you see, President Eisenhower was obsessed with balanced budgets. And so he did not like to spend a lot of money on anything. He famously didn't even want to engage in the space race. he established NASA, but didn't really fund it, or after Sputnik, right? And the thing about Eisenhower was it wasn't a question because we had jacked up tax rates on the wealthiest Americans so high that it was all getting paid for. Income tax rates on the top 1-2% of earners were, 90+% under Eisenhower. And that was because we're trying to pay off the debt from the Second World War. Also Eisenhower considered the interstate highway system necessary for national defense in case the U.S. was invaded. You could rapidly move men and material from one side of the country to the other. I mean, that's why all the interstates that run north-south are odd-numbered, and all those who run east-west are even-numbered. And they're, that was all a military undertaking, or at least for national defense purposes.
Yeah. And wasn't it a result of his he went across the country as a young Army officer, and the roads were horrific, and
yep.
And okay,
absolutely.
So better roads. I wonder I wonder if they what they would say about the roads now, because isn't the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure in the United States, graded kind of low right now because it's been so long since we've had any kind of improvements.
It's not great. My brother's a civil engineer, and our physical infrastructure in the United States, we're getting like a D. I mean, it really is badly in need of repair and massive investment. And the problem is, of course, the deadlock in Washington, and if any political party wants to get anything positive done, the other party is going to oppose them, not because they disagree with it, but just because they're the opposing political party.
Yeah, that makes it difficult. We did the one I posted, it didn't work. What, we got it? Okay. All right, cool. Trying to make sure we get all the questions. Oh, great. Okay. Something says currently in force. I believe they were oh, that's about the specific. How would infrastructure affect other industries, such as agriculture and fishing industries?
Well, agriculture and fishing would both benefit from better roads, better bridges, better port facilities, because those are all a part of hard infrastructure. So, you'd have fewer trucks that break down because of the condition of the roads. You'd have better port facilities that are, better for boats. I mean, there's just a number of different ways that they would benefit. When you have that sort of investment in infrastructure, it tends to trickle down to other sectors of the economy.
Okay. Answering a question in the I'll make this out loud as well. On the survey where it asks for your instructor's name, you need to put your instructor for the class that you want the extra credit in, so that we can inform those folks that you attended. So that's the instructor you put, your professor. Our speaker's name is Dr. John Lundberg, but don't put his name in your instructor unless you are from his class.
Right.
That will help keep things organized there. All right. I think we have any other questions. Is there the screen froze? Okay. Well.
We have a frozen screen.
That's seems to be par for our course today. So I know Mercury's not in retrograde today, so we can't blame it on that. But
we just need more investment in hard infrastructure at community colleges, right?
Yeah, and yes, we definitely need to have universal high-speed internet. That would be
yes.
That would be a tremendous thing.
Yeah, the internet needs to be universally available and a public utility. Honestly, that's what it needs to be.
Yes, I agree. That certainly would have helped a lot in the last 18 months or so.
Yes.
So, any other name? Darnell, the answer to the instructor's name is you put on there your instructor for the class that you want. The speaker's name is Dr. John Lundberg. There we go. All right. Barring any other questions, shall we? Chloe, do you have anything that you would like to ask about infrastructure? I mean, there's so many different questions about it. You know, we're getting to the point where we're talking about the Transcontinental Railroad in our 1301 classes. So, you know, you know, we could have you wax poetically about whether it should be the northern route, the southern route, or the central route across the continent.
The Civil War settled that one. It was the northern route.
Yeah. That was that. And I'm led to understand that the reason that the Transcontinental Railroad didn't get really built until afterward is because the South didn't want to vote for the Pacific Railway Act, and I don't know if you have any kind of insight on that. I would like to hear that.
Well, I mean, California is a free state.
Ah, yes. So we can't have railroads to them, right? Okay.
Nope, that would be counterproductive to slavery, as far as they're concerned.
Okay. Well, all right.
But yeah, I mean, the whole Gadsden Purchase in 1854 was about running a southern route for a transcontinental railroad, and I mean that's why we own, you know, that's why that part of Arizona is a part of the United States. So.
Paid more for that hunk of land than for the entire Louisiana Purchase, right?
Yeah, let's see. I think it was. I think we paid $10 million for the Gadsden Purchase was $10 million, but yeah, the entire Louisiana Purchase was $15 million, and this little chunk of what's now southern Arizona was 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Mexico really was not happy with us after the U.S.-Mexican War, so really not happy with us.
Really? Yeah. Okay. All right. Do you think more accessible space travel should be pursued? As in, is it helpful to our infrastructure?
Yeah, that's sort of the debate that's going on now, right? Should these billionaires be spending their money on private space travel, or should they be spending their money on, you know, paying taxes to pay for hard infrastructure? That's a hard one because we don't know what the future of space travel is going to look like. We don't know if, you know, climate change is going to finish this planet off and we're going to have to try for something else. I mean, you know, it's one of those things. It's difficult to tell at this juncture. But I do think that more investment in NASA and space exploration is always a good thing for scientific inquiry, for you know, like I said, just for the inventions that come out, you know, of federal funding for think tanks like that. So, you know, but yeah, I think that we always need more funding for space travel, but I'm not sure about private space travel like that and junkets. I'm not sure how much good it does. That's a hard one because we just don't know precisely what the future is going to bring in terms of you know, human beings in space.
Yeah, and is space travel just for the sake of saying you've traveled into space? Is that useful at all? And because it doesn't seem like they are like, you know, you pay however many millions of dollars to get on Bezos' ship, and then you go up, you achieve space flight, and then you come back down, and where have you actually been? There's not even a T-shirt stand, so you can't get a T-shirt. So
no. No, I don't see that as useful at all. I do see it as useful if they're going to send, biologists and, other scientists up on those flights as well, so they can make observations and conduct experiments. But as far as just the tourist travel into space, yeah, not so much.
We've had a question asking to explain human infrastructure once more.
So human infrastructure is, as I understand it, and the way I've applied it here, is simply an investment in people. It's an investment in unemployment benefits, and it's an investment in community colleges to provide low-cost, quality education opportunities. It's investment in public schools. It's an investment in programs like Medicare and Medicaid and universal pre-K and things like that. That's how I've been using human infrastructure.
And human infrastructure helps the United States by strengthening the country, by strengthening the people who live in the country.
Oh yeah. No, let's say that that Medicare pays out X amount for your medical care. That money is going to go into the private economy and have a multiplier effect. Anytime the federal government spends money and that money goes out into the public, it's going to have a multiplier effect on the economy.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it's not just helping the individual people; it's helping the country as a whole. Because
it's helping. I mean, well, let's take community college for instance, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you and I teach at a community college. The community college pays us X amount that we're not going to discuss, but the community college pays us that money, and then we go out and we spend that money in the community, and that money then has a multiplier effect on our local economies.
Sure. Yeah. And if we're talking about universal pre-K and we're talking about daycare assistance and things like that, it's also, as I'm led to understand, part of this human infrastructure thing. It also allows, if you have a family, if you have children, it allows you to still be able to go out and work a job, because you don't have to worry about where your child is or who's taking care of it and using.
Yeah. Everyone in society benefits from a more educated, more stable, more prosperous society, and that starts with individuals, and we all benefit from that.
Right. Yeah. All right. Okay. Any more questions? We're going to put out a last call for questions, and barring any questions, we can this to you. And once again, if you have not yet, please fill out the survey, the one that Chloe Northrup has posted. Apparently, the one that I posted earlier is we're unable to access that one. So, if you haven't filled it out, please fill it out so we can get that recorded as present. Any final questions? If not, we're going to thank our speaker immensely for talking to us today, taking time out of your Friday. And we would like to remind you once again that we have another event next Friday celebrating Native American Heritage Month. We have posted a link to it earlier in the Q&A, and we would certainly hope to see many of you there. I think Dr. Northrup will be running things more directly that time, and so I can almost guarantee you it will go off without a hitch, because I will not be in charge. So thank you, Dr. Lundberg, and if there are no more questions, last call, and then I thank you, and we can say goodbye for the day. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wisely.